people who have decided to view this today. So we've got lots of questions. I want to ask my panelists about their experiences growing up. I know that the panelists have cards that they've written on to prepare for this. So I'm really excited to chair this discussion. So first of all, let me see who I should pick. Jephta, how about you? Can you show me your card? Ah, home, right. So, right, you picked home, and for you, what was your experience like in home in relation to your family? Could you explain a little bit about what that would be like? Well, the Black deaf community, in terms of me as a child, my experience would have been very different as a deaf child. I wasn't born in the UK. I moved here from Ghana. I was very young. And when I arrived, it was very, very discombobulating for me. My family spoke Twi. They didn't speak English. That was the native Ghanaian language. And as a deaf child in a family of Twi-speaking parents, it was very strange to me. I couldn't understand English. My first language was Twi, what my family spoke. My family were able to gesture sometimes, but very rarely did we have in-depth conversation. It was a mixture of English and Twi, and that's how I communicated. Thank you for explaining that. So you had to navigate your family with a different language. Thank you for explaining that. So I'd like to ask you, growing up, did you experience racism? Because I know many people that are Black do. So what was your experience of racism? Well, in terms of individuals directly racist towards me, no, but it was covert. When I was at school, I was the only Black child in my year. There were others around, a few others around, but there were very few Black teachers as well. I remember there being only one Black teacher, and most of the other teachers were white. And so there was another child who was deaf, but white. And so in terms of racism, growing up, I would put my hand up and ask my teacher about the things that I wanted to achieve. I mean, I was hungry for achievement. My family are very focused on education. So I knew that was an important value within my family environment, and that I shouldn't waste the education that I was receiving. So with that in mind, I said to my teacher, I want to achieve all these things. And my teacher's response to that was, you ought to do sport. And of course, a lot of Black children are directed into taking sports. But politically, I was interested in politics and economics. I wanted to do a great deal of academic study. But my teacher decided that I ought to focus on sports. That really impacted me. And secondly, I remember, you know, I used to have my afro in school and sometimes an afro comb. And the teacher would say, you need to cut your hair off. And I felt like I was policed in school for having an afro. And this underlying racism really did annoy me. It upset me. And, you know, I sat down long and hard and thought about the responses I was getting and thought, do other Black people feel this when they're in isolation in an environment? And it really hit me, because there is covert racism and it's a big problem. It's not just me, but others. And because of that, quite often people don't focus on their school life. They focus on other areas of life and think about how they're going to get themselves to university. So at that time, I felt there was an undercurrent of racism. Once I was walking down the road from school. I was at the bus stop. I was just chilling at the bus stop. 3 police cars just zoomed up in front of me. I didn't know what was going on. They were talking away. I couldn't understand a word they were saying, of course, because I'm deaf. They were talking away really rapidly and I couldn't grasp what was going on. And they waved at me and beckoned me towards them. I was really anxious. My heart was pounding. I was on my own. There were no other people around observing. There were no witnesses, no observers. It was just me. And suddenly I felt the might of the police surround me. I was only 15 years old, very young. And from that moment on, when they all approached me, they grabbed me, and then they realized I was deaf. I kept repeatedly saying I'm deaf. Initially, they ignored me. And then they realized that I was deaf and said, oh, sorry, you just fit the description of someone we're looking for. Not one of them said sorry. They just got back into their cars and drove off. Up until now, the trauma of that stays with me. You know, 15, I was so young. I was so young, and that is in my subconscious. I have these flashbacks, and every time a police car comes past or slows down, I go back to that place. So the impact is quite harsh on me. Wow. That's really, really awful hearing that. I've heard a lot of things like that about stop and search, people experiencing that. Black people experiencing stop and search. And, you know, I'm really sorry to hear about your experience at that age. So I'd like to talk to Semhar and Donna about what their experiences were like. Well, that happens to a lot of young Black boys, you know, and I think because there's knife crime, they're profiled. You know, there's racial profiling that goes on with young Black boys. You know, as a Black girl and now a Black woman, I'm not so affected by that as Jephta would be. So that what he's just described is awful. And you probably would never experience racism like that in Ghana because there's more equity amongst the population. And the fact that you're deaf and that you had to go through that, wow, I take my hat off to you, Jephta. I mean, it's ongoing. It's really sad. How do we stop it? In particular, the aggression that we experience from the police. Yes, Donna, would you like to add to that? Yeah, when I was about 10, I always loved, you know, being out independently. I lived in a community that was safe. At that time, I didn't have any thoughts about fear, being fearful. So I'd wander off by myself. I saw about 3 or 4 boys, teenagers, around 15 or 16 years old, so a bit older than me. You know, I'm deaf, so they may have had something to say to me. I don't know what it was, but they spat at me. They all spat at me. And I was really confused. I was only young, 9 or 10. I was really upset, of course. I ran home and I said, I said to my mum, these boys have spat at me. She said, right, where are they? Show me where they are. She accompanied me back to where they were. My mum was really angry, but at the same time, with the anger, she had to compose herself. You know, I don't know exactly what my mum said to them, but I know she had some severe words with them and they kind of backed off. And, you know, after that, they left me alone. But that's the only extreme experience that I can say that I've had, really. So can I ask you, Jephta, can you explain to me, in terms of your cultural identity and race, how does that impact you? As I mentioned earlier, my family, when they first moved, the first generation to move from Ghana, they were actually, and so they had a lot of their Ghanaian culture that they carried with them in terms of the language and how they interacted with each other in the family, with my extended family, my cousins and my uncles, the body language. You know, we were very relaxed when we were at home. However, once I left the safety of my home, my mum would become very fearful and say, you must speak in English. And I noticed that shift in her. I was very young, of course, so I didn't understand why my mum would adjust her way of being in the world because we were in public. Not just my mum, but my father too, and my aunts. They would adjust their way of being when they were outside. So they would put on what I would call their Western face. And they had to do this because if they didn't, and they continued to be relaxed, people would look upon them differently. So I learned that from them. When I got older, when I was about, I would say after I was my 15th birthday, when they explained it to me, I better understood. Because I had the strong Ghanaian culture within me, but my deaf culture, my deaf identity, I didn't acquire that until much later on. I was in a mainstream school. There were other deaf people there, but I tended to disregard them. And I would try and fit into the hearing world and the Black hearing world because I felt more comfortable there. And I would ignore my deaf identity. I would disregard it. And as I became older, my deaf identity developed. But I felt that my Black identity was stronger than my deaf identity. And perhaps if I had moved to Ghana, I would have embraced my deaf identity as equal. But here in the UK, with both identities presented to me, I felt my Black identity was more at the forefront. Even now, you know, for the BLM movement and all of the things that are happening now, to access that, I feel that I'm straddling both my Black and deaf identity. But yes, growing up, I was Black first. Yeah. Similarly, I would say, yeah, we intersect at different places. I'm deaf, I'm Black, but which is it first? Black Lives Matter movement occurred, and I'm thinking, right, I am definitely Black first because I want to have that kind of parity with the movement. I want to identify with that first. So in terms of Black BSL, the colloquialisms of signing with Black signs, can you summarize that for me? So I would say, I would say I have a few bits of terminology. You know, white people sign, and I remember the first time I met someone at 17 who was Black and deaf. They were really relaxed with their signing. And the hearing person who was deaf was signing away. And I remember thinking, wow, this is how I am. This is how we are. We're the same. And then I noticed a similarity to American culture with London culture, the nuances and subtleties in the language, the colloquial language was very similar. So I think that I picked up that. Of course, when people speak, it's a different quality. But when you're using sign language, now that I am living in the north of England, I noticed that the colloquialisms are very different. And the BSL in the north of England, there's a big difference between that and the south of England.
Yeah, with London, I'm in Bristol as well, so I see the difference as well. I think obviously with London, it's quite vast. So going to the Deaf Club there is amazing. I was very drawn to it back when I first entered it out as well. But moving on, thank you very much, Jephta, for talking about your experiences. Next, who are we going to go to then? Oh, I think it's me. I think it is me. Goodness. Right, I have to pick up my own card now. So let's see what I'm talking about. Work, of course. So questions about work. I'm going to have to ask myself the questions, aren't I, and then respond to them. Never mind. One question I asked myself was, what was it like, you know, growing up and with the education that I experienced growing up as well. In school, growing up, it was total communication, and then I moved to secondary school, which was in the Surrey area, kind of near London. I really enjoyed education. I loved learning things, but unfortunately, a lot of the people within the area that I studied were white. I think there were only 3 Black students in my class, and I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I learned lots of different things. But upon leaving school, linked to my education and my achievements based on that, I feel quite proud of myself. Obviously, you're seeing me here presenting today. What about you, Semhar? Yeah, well, I've got a little bit of a different background. I know that Jephta moved from Ghana, but I was born in the UK. My parents were actually first generation immigrants. They moved in the 70s. So I was the first generation born in the UK. And I think there were lots of expectations on us. Obviously, when we were born, my parents obviously found out we were deaf, and they wondered how on earth they could survive in the UK. Obviously, they didn't speak English, so it was a big, massive cultural change for them. And looking back at my childhood, I feel quite lucky that I had the right people, I had the right resources, and they were signposted quite well. Obviously, they contacted the doctors, education professionals, my school was good. Looking back, I realised that I lost my Blackness, to be honest, but I'll explain a little bit about that later. But it's really interesting seeing you talk about the different regions that you were brought up in. Obviously, in London, it's very diverse. The north and the west obviously was quite isolating. Is that right, Donna? Yes, that's right. I was brought up in a white community, as I was saying. My school, my primary school, infants, obviously it was all white children within the school. My mum brought me up in a way that made sure that I could get on well. And it's really thanks to my mum for my upbringing. She encouraged me to get on with life. Okay, so another question that I've got to ask myself. Do you have any experiences of racism, so linked to like sign names and things like that? When I first arrived at school, no, I think actually maybe primary school or something. My name is David Ellington, and I was given this sign name. I accepted it at the time, but over the years it has changed. It is a racist sign. And they realised that and changed it to DE to represent my name, David Ellington. And this is my sign name now, as it exists. Looking back, I have other deaf friends, and their sign names are still this sign, which is the sign for Africa. But it's a very old-fashioned sign. And, you know, some people are quite proud of that. But I wonder who taught them that sign. And that's interesting if we focus on that. Who taught them the sign and who actually gave them that sign name? Donna, I wasn't given a sign name actually. I had this later in life, but I remember a Black person was talking to me, talking about a person, and I didn't feel comfortable with a particular sign name they tried to impose on me. I didn't feel comfortable with that sign that you did earlier, the sign for Africa. It's a very old-fashioned sign, and it was linked to a lot of people's names. It was borrowed, actually, and that was the sign for Black as well. So the sign for Africa was the same as Black, and it's this kind of rubbing on your nose, which isn't appropriate at all. So I rejected that. Linguistically back then, is that right? That was a sign for Black, goodness me. Well, we obviously have, you know, a lot of research that's gone on. There's more exposure, and I think people are realizing the racism that existed in some sign names. I'll give you an example. David explained the sign Black or Black. I'll do a little bit of a role play to show you what I mean. So American Sign Language, this is a sign for white. And this is the sign for black in American Sign Language. So I'll change to a different sign now. Beautiful, beautiful. Ugly, ugly. So you've got that. So as I said, this was ASL. Remember, the sign for white was this, and the sign for beautiful is this. In American Sign Language, this is a sign for black, and this is the sign for ugly. Do you see what I'm trying to get? It's the hand shape. It's all linked to the hand shape. So it's very linguistically based. It's the same with British Sign Language. Specific signs are associated with specific skin colours and actual colours as well. So it's really interesting to look at how sign has worked and developed. So if you look at the sign for white and beautiful, they're so similar. Obviously, in Britain, we have more signs for more linguistic choices, but it's time to change. We need progress with that. David, I think we need to turn take, because I'm realizing for the interpreters, we need to allow them time to switch over to the different screens to see everyone so that they can voice over everyone perfectly. So just aware of that. But let's move on. Sorry, Jephta, you wanted to add something? Yeah, I've noticed with BSL and how that has been influenced. I think if you look at the political influences, there's definitely politics involved in the way signs have been developed. But I mean, that's a story for another day, I suppose. But so what about Black history? Have you learned anything from it? And if not, why not? Looking back, looking at Black history, to be honest, I don't think I learned that much about it. In religious education, I remember having a teacher write on the board quite clearly, said apartheid. And apartheid means separation, so the separation between whites and blacks. And that was in South Africa at the time. I was fascinated once that was mentioned. So I did more research into it, and I found out that it was linked to America and colorism. So, you know, black people weren't allowed on the bus, they were called coloureds and so on. I was 15 at the time, and I really wanted to do more research into it. I wish I could have asked my family, to be honest, and to help me. Do you all feel the same and wish you could know more about Black history? I wish I had talked and shared more with my parents, and they to me as well, about racism, but it was taboo. We couldn't really talk about it. They hoped, I think, that it would be eradicated in the future, but looking back at history, it just never has. I don't know why my parents never spoke to me about racism. They warned me maybe slightly about it, but I felt that I had to find out for myself. I feel it would have prepared me more for the future. So looking back, I really wish it hadn't been such a taboo subject. Donna? Yeah, I agree. To be honest, school didn't really educate us about Black history. It talked about history, yeah, like World War I, and then different things within France and so on. But my mum and my parents actually told me about some historical facts, but within school, I didn't learn about them. I feel like things have been wiped out, to be honest. So I've gone along ignorantly within the world and not really knowing about Black history. And it's only recently I've started to learn more. And I feel that it's bringing me back to my history, something that I've missed and I haven't been a part of my whole life. Yeah, that really is interesting. My brother went to a hearing school, And I asked if he'd learnt about Black history. And he said, yeah, I think it was over 3-month period. I think you had lots of different modules and options and discussions that you had with your class. I think it was 1982, 1983, 84, maybe around that time. It was really interesting that hearing experience was very different to the deaf experience as well. I really wanted some in-depth knowledge, but I feel school deprived me of that. I had to do the hard work and I had to research to find out about Black history. And is that right for everyone else? Yep, with Semhar saying, yes, through everyday life, I've found out about police brutality. So not only in America, but also here, I feel we're having a little bit of a taste of history, which is enabling us to link back to our history over the years. I think I'm still learning, and it's really a difficult time. Okay, I really have to move on. I'm so conscious of time. But now I think I've finished asking my questions. So let's move on to the next person. And who's next? Is it Semhar? What card have you got today? Society, society. Okay. Can you explain colorism to me? What's your sign for that as well, colorism? Well, this is a sign I've created, colorism. So it means kind of oppression based on your skin colour or your skin tone. So people who are darker skinned, if you look at, for example, films, TV shows, music videos, fashion industry and so on, they pick a lot of fair Black girls, Black guys. So I feel it's very rare you'd see someone of a darker skin tone within those realms. So that's what we call colorism. We need to expand the exposure of lots of different skin tones. And I know I've been a victim of colorism. I know victim seems like a strong word, but that's how I felt. I was given a job. I was booked for a modelling job. And it was for a recruitment company who wanted to show that they were being diverse, and it was helping organise finding the right people for the company and so on. It's a global company. And I did some research. They were very high profile, so I got really excited. I attended with my interpreter, arrived. They were very welcoming at first, and I met all the models there, and I realised there were a few white, few Asian models. I was the one Black model in attendance. They wanted to be more diverse. They wanted to present themselves as being more diverse. So they had models there who had Down syndrome, some who were wheelchair users. So they were being quite diverse, but I was Black and deaf, and I felt I was there really in a tokenistic way. I was also very dark skinned too. There was a lot of Africans who've moved to Europe for work. The company is actually based in Holland, but there's no representation for darker skinned ladies. So I didn't feel very safe there. The makeup artist as well did my makeup, which turned out looking lighter and fairer than I would normally do my makeup. There was someone blonde, blue-eyed, who matched obviously that typical European beauty. I think that, you know, it is celebrated more than the darker beauties. And I really thought they were trying to make an effort to be more diverse, but they weren't. So I've been very careful ever since about attending bookings and so on, because I do my research before I go, because I don't want to arrive and actually what they're looking for is someone lighter skinned than me. So that's colorism. Very interesting. Thank you, Semhar. Moving on, I wanted to talk about white privilege, however you may sign that, within the theatre world. Have you had any experience of that at all, if you're able to tell me about that? Yeah, white privilege, it doesn't have to be just in the theatre. I mean, it happens everywhere. So my family's first language isn't English. We're always a bit behind. So we've had to learn things through school. I went to a boarding school. I was the only Black person in my year. So there were no role models for me at the time. I wasn't able to find my true identity. It's really difficult talking about white privilege. It just means they're always a step ahead. So they know their history, they know where they're going, they know who they are, and they're able to work through that and navigate the world quite easily, whereas we don't have the history. I feel our history was stolen through slavery and through migration and so on. You know, we'd have civil wars in Eritrea, but we don't learn about those. So I feel like I'm always having to fill in the gaps of my life as I go along. And so it's very difficult trying to match up with, you know, the Western society, which in essence is more white. So my family lived in Berkshire, which is quite, my family lived in London and I had to go to school in Berkshire, which is away from my family. And I found the deaf community through school, through London. So I met people of all different skin colours, religions, spoke different languages and so on. And I always had a disadvantage with my name. My name's very different, and obviously that's identifiable. I was forced to fill in an equal opportunities form. So I feel that I just fill that out, but I feel there's no point to it. I feel like they're just doing it for a tick box exercise. In my field, I'm a digital designer and it's very competitive. It's a very competitive world and it's a typically white male world. And so I am the complete opposite to that. I'm a Black deaf lady. So I've obviously had concerns my whole journey. I had concerns about my name. If I change it, should I change it? And also, do I change my name because they're always going to stereotype me or fit me into this box? I'm not going to be exposed to other roles. So even my name growing up has caused an issue. At that time, obviously, there's no even Black directors and so on. So we need to expand that. We need to change the world. So talking about the BLM movement, the BLM campaign, do you feel it's risky? Do you feel that it's safe for you to join BLM and get with the movement? Well, Black Lives Matter, you know, it started ages ago. We all know that. But I don't think it affected me as much then as it does now. I think seeing all those videos with police brutality and such overt racism and systematic racism that proves we're at such a disadvantage, I think now's the time that people have to speak up and have a voice. And even with COVID at the moment, they've shown the disparity between us and white people. I think it's now time that we speak up, because COVID affects ethnic minorities more so the risks are higher. And even considering that, going to a BLM campaign and a march and a protest is quite a scary thought, knowing that we are the most at risk. So myself as a black deaf woman, I decided to go anyway with my friends. Obviously we wore our masks. We arrived at Hyde Park for the protest. Unfortunately, there was no interpreters, but we followed everything we could, as much as we could, obviously using the visual cues. So we had a banner. I'll show you mine on the day. It was a really good experience. It was quite liberating, actually. You can put your message on this placard and show everyone your message. There was two men speaking. I couldn't understand a word, obviously, so I was chatting away, signing to my friends, and obviously everyone was wearing masks, so communication was very difficult, and everyone was also really close. I felt very inspired though. It was so peaceful. There were so many different races there, so many different disabilities, but we all wanted to show that we were for Black Lives Matter. We wanted to show solidarity. We wanted to stop oppression. And it felt great. It felt I was in the right place. It was so inspiring. You can imagine like how many people went, 15,000, and looking at the news, and the next day, Speaker's Corner, John Boyega, he spoke there. You know, he's a famous actor. He was famous for Star Wars. He stood up. I think he's only 28 or something. He's British born, but he used his platform to speak out, because it's really important. Black lives do matter. I was so inspired. I advise you all to read what he said. It was so inspiring. And Black deaf people are interested in politics too. So I think it's great that we show more, we get involved more. So I'm really looking forward to the protest changing the conversation now.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we've got quite a few questions from people. So I'm going to ask Donna what your card has on it. Can you show us your card? Future, right. So, do you have concerns for your future in terms of opportunities when going for auditions, gaining experience, or what can you say about that? Well, I remember 2 years ago, I applied for a job because this was my dream job that I had applied for. So I applied for it. I filled in the application form and I was rejected. So I thought, okay, I tried again, applying for the same job. So I applied for the same job, and again, I was rejected without any feedback at all. So the third time, I was adamant that I was going to apply for this job again, and I was offered an audition. I thought, fabulous. I went along. I met a few other deaf people there and had discussions with them, and they also said, well, it was their very first time. For me, I already had experience as an actor. So I did the audition. I thought it all went well. They were going to let me know whether I got the job or not. As time went on, they informed me that I had been rejected again for the third time. The others who'd gone to the audition and had no experience compared to me, who had experience, the others were offered the job, and they were all white, coincidentally. So as the only person with experience, but the only person that was Black, it made me really question how comes they had been given the job. I wondered what was different. So being the person that I am, I worked doubly hard. I was adamant that I would give my best at the audition. So I went along, I applied again, I was offered an audition. I went along, went through the process, and I was still rejected. So after my fourth rejection, over a period of 5 years applying for this job, I was rejected. And I realized that it was because the cohort were all white. There were no Black people in that job, none at all. And, you know, when I looked at what was going on there, I could see that there was some favoritism going on there. So it was very unfair. And I was really disappointed about that. So that's one scenario. The second scenario is regarding theatre, being allocated a role. This is a long time ago. So we were being allocated a role, a character. I got the script, went through the script, looking at my character, my role. I went through the entire script to the first half and realized that I didn't appear yet. Finally, in the second act, I was in the script with one simple line. So my role was incredibly small. Like, it was like a peanut role. I had no dialogue, just, it said simple acting, like being given peanuts. That really hurt me. So I continued reading the script. Once I'd finished and I had to be on stage, I was there for 10 seconds in total, just 10 seconds. And I felt really saddened by that. You know, as a Black deaf role model, I wanted to shine. Yeah, it's important to do that. Yeah, I just wanted to have a role where I could shine. So that was really disappointing. And then the third scenario was linked to a video. So somebody asked me to be in a video. I was asked to be in a video. I thought, fine, I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing. And then they announced that the video was ready for release. So I watched the video and then I thought, hang on, I've missed something. I watched it again. And what was really interesting was that the favourites were there on show, but the rest of us, including myself, were given a really low profile within the video. And I was the only one that was given a low profile in that video as a Black person. And I felt that we should have had equal status in that video, not just have a group that was favoured above the rest and elevated above the rest, because it was so obvious that they were favoured. And it was just really disappointing, again, to have had that experience. Yeah, so we hope that in the future that will not happen. People will be more analytical and make sure that they change their ways of giving people work. So sorry, because of the time constraints, I'm going to have to move on now to Paula, because we've got lots of questions from people in the audience that we have to respond to. Hi, everyone. That's really sad, Donna. I'm really saddened to hear about your experience of discrimination. Thank you all so much for being so open and so honest and sharing with us your experiences. It's really important for us to listen to Black deaf people's lived experiences and have more insight about how we're going to change our white privilege. Right, so you were talking about your work. So Martin has a question, and the question is, have any of you experienced racism in work, and how did you deal with it? Martin has been asking deaf people about their experiences, and most deaf people are reluctant to talk about it. So we're asking you, the panel, have you experienced racism in work, college, school, anywhere? That's the question for all of you. So discrimination as a deaf person or as a Black deaf person? Well, either, but primarily Black. So have you experienced racism within the deaf community as a Black person? Is that clear? So this is a question for all of you. So let's start with Jephta. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I remember my very first internship in a bank, right? HSBC. So I went along and lo and behold, the workforce was all white. And I looked around and I thought, where are the Black people here? Every so often I'd see one. So talk about diversity. I thought this person is a diversity officer, but I thought there was very little diversity. Anyway, I remember at work in the lunchtime, I got my lunch. I brought it from home. So I had my own lunch from home and they were like, gosh, that smells strong. Never smelled anything like that before. I was 17. I was on an internship and everyone was looking at me. So my white colleague was the one that said it. And you can imagine my response to him saying that it smelt strong. So after that, I didn't bring any more food from home. I'd just go to the shop and buy sandwiches. So, you know, I was more preoccupied with thinking about how they felt about me And now I realise, looking back, that that really impacted me and made me change my behaviour. I was young and I was black and I wanted to go out and I wanted to go into different companies. And I wonder if other people have felt like that. Jephta, you've brought up really important points linked to microaggressions. Somebody said, oh, what's that food you've got? Oh, is your hair real? Oh, you're very clever for a deaf person. It's also patronising. You know, when I look back, I used to be dismissive of it, but actually, no, it's racist as well. I thought it was linked to just being deaf, but what it made me become was a little bit withdrawn. I became withdrawn and silent and invisible, and that's not right, really. So, you know, that question about discrimination, no one's going to admit to discriminating against a black person. They're going to be defensive. And that area, yeah, it's covert, and it's really difficult to prove it if it's covert. You know, it's really difficult to prove covert discrimination. You know, trying to work out if it's linked to black or deaf, it's really difficult, you know, but that's why I think more people need to be involved in senior leadership. It's a massive challenge in order to manage people, you know, people think, oh, it's risky employing a deaf person. And it's hard when your whole team is white. You know, you apply for a lesser role and very rarely do you get promoted. So is it discrimination or preferences linked to prejudice on HR's way of being? Well, I remember, linked to discrimination. I went for work experience for a big media company, perhaps 1 month or 6 weeks. And in the workforce, I was the only black person. So I thought, okay, well, you know, I'm here to learn and do my work. After my month had finished, I kind of felt, oh, has anybody not noticed that my work experience has finished? It seemed odd. I thought, do I just leave now? Do I inform them that this is my last day today? What do I do? I was really anxious. And so I approached the head of the department and I said, today's my last day. I finished work today. And they were like, oh, your last day? Oh, right. Well, they were lost for words. And it was just like, yeah, bye. Bye. And it was just like that. I just left. It was like there was no care, no real interest, you know, like, oh, like in a small celebration to say farewell, given that I'd been there for a month, you know, and of course I wouldn't go back there again after that. There was no warmth and no care about me. It was just very cold. Right, so Paula, do you have another question for us? Thank you for that. That's really interesting, Donna, what you said about your work experience placement and the lack of leadership. You know, people need to be encouraged. Deaf black people need to be encouraged to become leaders because you have leadership qualities, of course. So you need to be supported and encouraged to lead, to take leadership roles. So I would say go for it. I've got loads of questions. So I'm going to try my very best. This is a question for Donna and Semhar. The question is, there's no name, it's anonymous. Do you see yourselves as deaf first or black first or female first? Or do you reject all of these labels? And do you see yourself as someone else, or would you use all three identities? Thank you.
Okay, so over to you, Donna or Semhar. Who's first? Donna can go first. Okay, well, that's interesting actually, because of my upbringing, I identify myself as nothing. I've just kind of stuck my head down and just kept going. I've just got on with it. I did go to a mainstream school and they had deaf and hearing kids there. So how do I identify? I don't know. I tried to fit in with everyone, and I tried to fit in with my hearing peers. So maybe it was about when I was 16 that I entered the deaf world for the first time, and it really had such an impact on me. And I was like, I'm deaf, I'm definitely deaf, I'm like all of you, this is amazing. So I didn't identify myself as being Black at that point, to be honest. I just felt I'm the same as everyone, I'm deaf like you, yeah, this is my family, this is where I belong, this is wonderful. Moving on later, when I went to London, I joined the Deaf Club, and then I was exposed to deaf Black people for the first time. It was phenomenal. And for the first time, I could say, yes, I'm Black. But as to which comes first, deafness or Blackness, I didn't identify with either particularly more than the other at that point. It was only when I got a job, I think, and a person asked me that question, and they said, you need to, think about yourself. You're a deaf Black woman, or should I call you a Black deaf woman? And that had an impact on me because I'd never heard it put in those terms before. And I needed time to kind of let that digest and think about what that meant for me. And I realized I am Black. I am Black, deaf, and a woman. So definitely at that point, and it took me all those years to say Black first. And Semhar, how about you? Yeah, very similar. My mum was a very strong female role model. Obviously, we're all female. My father, the poor thing, is inundated by women in the family. He's a very quiet man because of it, I think. But obviously, I was. Oh, I'm sorry. I think Semhar's frozen. Okay, she's back. Black or deaf? I hadn't decided yet. It was when I went to boarding school that I got the biggest shock of my life. Everyone signed. I had deaf peers with strong sign language. And I'd kind of lost my language, to be honest, at that point. So I became kind of big D deaf at that point through school, mixing with my brother and sister. And surprisingly, I didn't experience racism in school. I know there was only a few Black girls within the school, but I didn't experience racism. It was after I finished school, I moved to London, and like you said, obviously went out on the social scene and to the deaf pub, met so many people, so many deaf people from different schools, different regions around the UK, Black, Asian, a whole melting pot. I'd only met a few deaf Black people at that point. So I met two girls who were the same ethnic origin as myself, which was amazing. So I found my Black identity much later in life, definitely. And it was only then that I was able to reflect and link that back to my family and their childhood and their experiences. I was born in the UK, so it's very different. I think I adapted to the UK way of life. But definitely at this point, I am a Black deaf woman, Black first. It's easy to forget how that came about, but I think it's important what you were saying about empowerment, leadership, and role models. You need to see those people and you need to have them. But it's a very good question, Paula, very good. Okay, I think we'll welcome Paula back for another question. Thank you, amazing, really interesting discussions. There's a question for Jephta. You could be a strong leader for young deaf Black people, a really strong role model. Have you thought about maybe going back to Ghana, and I hope I've signed that right, Ghana, to kind of educate them about their rights? Funnily enough, actually, good question. I'm a university student at the moment, but yeah, as soon as I'm doing my degree in economics and politics, which I'm very passionate about. But in secondary school, I started thinking about going back to Ghana and giving back to my community. But also I have to remember that I already have a privilege, to be honest, because I came to the UK. So I've got to remember that going back to Ghana, they live in very impoverished situations. So it's important to me to recognise that within myself before going back to Ghana. I don't want the same cycle to occur. I want to give everything I can to the community, the deaf community in Ghana especially as well. I want to engage with them. I want to see them develop and grow. And from there, they can decide where they want to go, move to America, the UK, take their studies further. But I definitely have a strong sense of society with them. So it's definitely something that I definitely want to go back to. And I want to ensure that people have deaf Black role models. I want to show that you can do it, and people identify that there's something that they can achieve. Growing up, I didn't have that, so I definitely want that. So I know Donna's the same, Semhar's the same. We're seeing things change now, and I want to engage with that. I want to keep the momentum going, and I want to share that with the community. So going back to Ghana, yes, I have thoughts about what I want to develop here in the UK as well as Ghana. It's really important to kind of develop the community and see communities thrive, because you don't want to repeat the cycle of suffering, as you said. So amazing, Jephta, that you're thinking of taking it UK and Ghana wide as well. Amazing. Let's look to Paula for another question at that point. There are so many questions, it's so hard to pick which one. Oh no, it's so difficult. But there's a question from Rachel Beasy. What are specific barriers that you all have faced in auditions, for example, within the audition process? And how can artists make auditions more accessible for deaf actors? Thank you. Anyone want to take that? Semhar's got her hand up, and then I'll answer as well. I think there's some agencies that focus on disability. So asking me to go for auditions, I've got to ensure that I've got an interpreter. There's always this dispute about who will pay for the interpreter. So I always have that worry going to any auditions. If you also talk about your background to an interpreter, I find that the interpreter sometimes doesn't understand if they don't have that cultural understanding. So that's also an extra barrier, even through having an interpreter there. Clarifying language, BSL and SSE. When people are auditioning, they have no idea. They expect you to be able to explain it to them. And I think it would be good to have someone, maybe like an advisor, I suppose, of some kind. I think that's missing, so that, you know, I don't want to perform my best if they don't really understand where I'm coming from. They're not really understanding the language and so on. So they need to understand why I have these barriers and why other people have an advantage over me when I go for auditions. Semhar, so similar to myself, going to auditions sometimes with an agent. At that time, they emailed me. I think it was late at night. They should have emailed me in the working day, but anyway, they emailed me late at night. Looked at the email. I arrived, and I don't know kind of what the audition was. It said, "You'll find out on the stage when you get there." I was like, okay. I was deaf. There was no interpreter booked. It was really frustrating, and you can imagine, normally with an open audition, you'd get alerted 3 days before, so you'd have time to prepare, you'd have time to ensure there was an interpreter there, you'd be able to find to source an interpreter who was maybe the same culture as you, Black like myself. I would want a male interpreter, obviously, to be able to voice over how I would speak. So I think there's more behind the camera and so on. It's a little bit different working that way, but going for auditions is quite problematic. Accessibility is the key, and it also, having that time to prepare, so ensuring everything is in place. So I think if people could ensure that they're asking the questions, they're giving plenty of time, making sure everything is set up before the day. I think also, do you think that it would be good to have someone to represent you, to be your voice on the day? I think sometimes if you don't have the right representation, it gets quite difficult. And I think if a deaf person needs to meet with an interpreter, they should get their preferred interpreter in time, so that they're able to fill in the gaps and the interpreter's fully aware before you get there. So you're getting the right representation on the day, and the voiceover is then smooth, it's flowing, they're processing at your speed, and they're able to represent you in the best way possible.
Yes, absolutely. So some of the experiences have been positive, some have been negative. What have your experiences been like, Donna? Right, so I remember somebody wanted me to attend an audition. I was invited to it. I thought, oh, the theatre invited me. They gave me the script in advance, allowing me time to mull it over and allowing me to decide how I wanted to best play that character, whether it was dancing or just performing. So I mulled the script over in my head and thought about how I wanted to present it. And my decision was to present it in a poetic way. So I checked to make sure they had an interpreter, and they said yes. So on the day I arrived for the audition, met with the interpreter, and met the panel who were doing the audition, and they said, we're going to give you a few minutes to have a chat about the script. I said, okay, fine. 2 to 3 minutes actually is not enough, because I had a lot in my head. So I had to really convey what I wanted to do really quickly to the interpreter in the 3 minutes. And last of all, I wanted the interpreter to turn their voice off so that I would project my voice, because I felt that was more powerful. Anyway, I thought, gosh, I hope the interpreter is able to follow what I want to say and will match my tone and prosody. So I then started to sign, and I could see that the interpreter was behind by quite a lot. And I thought, should I slow down? Should I carry on? Because this is the flow of my poetry. This is the prosody and the intonation in my poetry. And I wanted to perform it as I wanted to. And I thought, well, they'll just have to catch up with me. Anyway, at the very end, I wanted to really project my voice, and the interpreter wasn't able to. And so I think I didn't have enough time initially. You know, I needed more time on the day, at least 10 minutes, to talk through what I had in mind about how I would present myself. And so I could be confident to do my best without being worried about the interpreter. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. There are so many questions being asked of us. So can you just really shortly add to that, Semhar? Yeah, so acting is a little bit different to music, of course, because auditions where you go and you have to dance, you know, they could be playing any music and you won't really understand it. But with the script, you can learn it beforehand. Whereas with the music, the lyrics, you can't really hear it. So looking back, I lost a lot of confidence doing music videos and dancing to music. You know, it's all right being taught to dance, but once you get there and you're in a mainstream hearing environment and there's music, it really does make you fall apart. You need the right interpreter, the right preparation. You need the music and lyrics in advance, I think. Great, thank you for that. Okay, Paula. So this is going to have to be the last question. So with regards to white privilege, the organizations that are out there are white-led. So the deaf community say, white privilege, no, that doesn't apply to me. So what is the very best way for us to educate deaf white people about white privilege? Because, you know, they may not be able to glean that information from reading information. So it says, perhaps you need a workshop or about anti-racism to educate people, to educate deaf people. So to set up a workshop, so it's visual. But then who would do that anti-racist training? Who would do that workshop? I hope that's clear. Right, so Jephta, did you want to add something to that? Oh, wow. Is this specifically at the white deaf community? Because if it is, we have to be very sensitive. We know that in the Black deaf community, we're exhausted. We're exhausted from the oppression we get, the double, triple oppression through jobs, through other people. It's a huge responsibility. So when white people are asking us, well, what is white privilege? Then we're burdened even more to explain. And again, you know, access is a massive big problem. We know that. In terms of education, there can be a workshop. Maybe the first workshop should be just basically something so that people learn and understand. But in terms of impacting people's understanding and learning, it could be a video. We could create a video where we have a white deaf person and a black deaf person working in parallel, showing examples of what life is like. I'm sure we can get lots of visuals, lots of videos, and increase the material we have and examples that we have. Because white privilege is often shown through structural racism, through organizations. And there's a lot of information online. So, oh, you disappeared. She's back. Sorry, now you're in a different position. So if we're asking white deaf people, we have to talk about all the white people that are in leadership, all the professionals that are in leadership, and we have to ask them, why do you think that is? Often white deaf people will say, oh, because they work hard. And we will say, no, they have an advantage over us. And so we have to show them really simple ways of understanding what white privilege is and how the system, the systemic racism works to further advance white people. Yes, Semhar. Well, since George Floyd was murdered, there seems to be more and more Black deaf people who are vocalizing what they're saying. So there's a lot of videos out there, but of course not enough of them are in BSL. And we're still learning. We're tired. Yes, we're exhausted. We're emotionally tired. We're mentally drained. And we're trying to make sense of what's been happening. It's painful for us. But we have to do something. You know, I haven't personally experienced a lot of racism throughout my life, but we have to think about what to do, because otherwise we're going to be further burdened with educating white people. So one person from a white deaf community, you know, not yet has one person asked me about it. Maybe they think it's taboo, maybe they think they'll argue, or maybe they think they'll look ignorant and foolish. And so maybe that's why they've not asked me yet, you know, but we have to start with dialogue, whether we do that through vlogging or like you said, it's, you know, it's more work for us.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's difficult. It's sometimes you can't tell if it's racism or not, but I think we all have to, I think it's about education. I think that's the main thing. And you have to then be proactive and ask the questions. And I think it's important to have a two-way conversation. So both sides. I think Black people, you're right, they're tired of explaining all the time. I think white people have access to so many things, but then also we have to get involved in the conversation. So I think it works both ways. Should we welcome Paula back? I think she's ending. We had the last question. Hello, wow. I think we've learned so much from you talking about all the different topics about home life, family life, the lack of deaf role models, the lack of Black deaf leaders. Leadership, there seems to be a big gap with that, and it's something that we should be encouraging. We've talked about white privilege, We've talked about the BLM movement, talked about tokenism as well within the theatre. Access at auditions, I mean, the list is immense. All the topics you've covered today, I think we've all learned a lot from all of you. Oh, sorry, I'm just lost myself, right. We really want to thank you. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being our panel and having these discussions with us. The topics, you know, the discussion hasn't ended at all. We have to look about this forward to the strategy and making sure that the Black deaf community are involved in the theatre more in all those different roles I mentioned right at the start. It's really inspiring actually listening to all of this. Just to let you know, what was that, David? Just to add to that. Yeah, to encourage more Black people to enter into the theatre world. I think, look at other theatre companies that are hearing. I think they've obviously, they have to get involved as well. Like I think Tawali is here today, the theatre company. There are role models out there. Talawa, sorry. I think that there's lots of role models out there. Oh, that's based in Sheffield, isn't it? Yeah, there's lots of people that we can contact and get on board and get involved with this. There were over 48 questions, just to let you all know. I wish we could have gone through all of them. We also had 127 people watching live, which is phenomenal. So thank you so much to all of you who are watching live. We really value you joining us and embracing this educative panel discussion. If anyone has been affected by any of the discussions today, please have a look at our website, the Definitely Theatre website. We have signposts to Sign Health, therapists, and there's also Black therapists as well. We have lots of support out there, so please follow the links if you need. There are lots of Black organisations that we've listed on there as well that can support you emotionally after this as well. Keep in touch with Definitely Theatre. The events page on our website, please keep an eye on that. Follow our Twitter, our Instagram, our Facebook, lots of information on the website. And we're bringing everything to an end. We'll show the questions on the screen. So you can add your views and your feedback. So please don't leave our panel. You're welcome to stay and feedback. We'll obviously go, but the audience can stay and you can have a click on and see all the questions that were asked tonight. We really appreciate you being here with us. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure, David saying, a pleasure. So if everyone can take their time and fill out this questionnaire at the end, it would be very much appreciated.